we'll probably give it another 3 or 4 minutes and then we'll get started. You're up here. Darn it.
You're not getting away with staying in the audience. They've got it. There's one, and they got 2 there. So I guess they're just gonna kind of hand them around.
Is the other one on the podium?
No, it's yeah, he might have put it up there. Yeah, I only see one on the table. So.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Great, good evening. My name's Brian Hickey, and I'm the General Manager of the Electric Department here at City of Seward. To my right is Taylor Crocker, he's our Operations Manager, and further to our right is Mark Begich, he's the CEO of Every Compass, and I'll give him a little bit of an introduction in a minute. I just wanted to kind of walk through why we're here tonight and a sort of a recap of what we've done so far. This is our 3rd town hall meeting. The objective of our town hall meetings is to create an open and transparent process for the community to come together and decide what I would say the future of your electric utility. Back in September, we launched this effort. We brought in the CEOs and a board member, 2 CEOs and a board member. They were from Cordova Electric, Copper Valley Electric, and Kodiak Electric. Those are both small sort of seaboard electric cooperatives, and they talked about how their world looks as an electric cooperative in a small seaboard town. Just for kind of scale, Cordova Electric is about half the size from an electrical load perspective when compared to Seward, and Copper Valley Electric is about twice as big as Seward from an electrical load perspective, and Kodiak is about that same size. So we brought those 3 folks in, and they gave me some of the ideas of what they're doing with their cooperatives in their communities to make a difference. The next town hall we had in December, we brought in the speakers from the larger electrical cooperatives in the Rail Belt. We had Travis Million from Golden Valley Electric, Sarah Lamb from Homer Electric. We had Tony Izzo from Golden Valley Electric, and a couple of the folks from Chugach were on. And with that, in that meeting, they sort of talked about their corporate values, and Trish Baker, her name was avoiding me, Trish Baker from Chugach. But they sort of talked about their values and what their co-ops are all about, and how they're actually working in their communities to do something, to better their communities and to deliver electricity safely, reliably, and efficiently. We also did a community survey. I got some great feedback from some of the folks here tonight that some of the questions may not have been as precise as they could have been. But we are going to rerun that survey here in the spring, or later in the spring. But the survey, we had the survey, and we had 2 focus groups where we brought selected members of the survey group together to have a more in-depth discussion about what the feelings were around how the electric utility is today and what the potential future for it is. And we've taken all that data, and we're using that sort of to inform these discussions that we're having right now. Tonight we're here, we have former U.S. Senator Mark Begich. He's also was a former mayor of the city of Anchorage, And the reason we brought him down to talk to you all is he was the mayor of the city of Anchorage, and in that role, he managed the electric department for the city of Anchorage, as well as the telephone utility. It was called Anchorage Telephone Utility at the time. And he'll talk a little bit about the journey that the city of Anchorage went on with the telephone utility, turning it into a municipal agency and eventually selling it, and some of the challenges and some of the benefits that he sees with the municipal ownership model. And I guess I should step back to the very beginning, and the premise that we're starting with here is the way the utility's been run for the last 30, 40 years is probably not sustainable going into the future, and so a change needs to be made, and we really want to bring the community together and create have an open and transparent process where everybody gets to say in it, and hopefully we can bring the community to a place where they come to a decision that at least the vast majority of folks are satisfied with. Community members are central to the process. There is no decision being made behind closed doors. There's no predetermined path. Really, the community needs to come together and form that path. It's a community conversation, and it's one that depends on input. And we really value the input. We have these meetings where we get to chat a little bit in the lobby. If there will be a question and answer session where you can come up and ask questions of the panel, myself, Taylor, and Mark, and Senator Bacon. Yeah. A lot of people call you Bacon. What works for you?
They call me other things.
They call you other things. That's right. Yeah, we're not going. Any rate, so you'll be able to ask questions, and what we're working toward is a time, ideally late summer, early fall of this year, where the community can come together and make a decision about what it is they want to do with the utility. We are committed to providing clear information, open forums for discussion like tonight, like our focus groups, bringing perspectives of other utilities to the community. We're going to use this survey as an opportunity for feedback. We'll rerun the survey. We may adjust some of the questions based on some of the comments I've received about it, but we'll take that survey and we'll ideally we'll have a better sense of where the community is, and that will help inform the city administration and the city council as to where they would go from here. And we try to be consistent with our communication throughout this whole process. We have a website, and we post documents and any of the flyers that go out on the website, and we'll try to push more information out there as it becomes available. We want an open, transparent, community-based process. And with that, what I'm going to do real quick is have Taylor Crocker as my operations manager, and Taylor does all the real work. I was sort of in the background, so Taylor's out there on the front line in the middle of the night when the snow's blowing, and along with the awesome team that we have at the utility, the line workers and operations and the administrative staff are just wonderful. So anyway, Taylor's going to give you a little bit of update on where we're going. We've done a number of projects to better align the utility with the future. And then when he's done, I'll give you a little update on the Clean Ports project, which I sort of handle the regional stuff in the Clean Ports project, and he's handling this other stuff. So Taylor?
Thanks, Brian. So a lot of people were following the council meetings last year. We were asking for lots of money for lots of different projects, and so that was the planning year. This year is our executing year, and just so far this month, we've placed our order for the AMI meters that will lead to greater transparency for your bills, allow us to track the different usage between different user groups better, and then that leads into our other software that we're going into a discovery phase on Monday with. It's called Professional Computer Services. So this will be like an enterprise software. It's a one-stop shop for our whole utility. Covers accounting, billing, our inventory control management, work order management, outage management system, so you can see where the outages are at and if the crew's responding. We have a meter data management system, and then our mapping system, which is going to make it much easier to design services and keep track of our infrastructure. So those two things kind of piggyback together, and we're hoping to be live with it early summer, which also leads to a member portal where you can log in on your phone, see your usage in real time, and pay your bill, look at outages, message us. the whole deal. So as far as the IT stuff goes, those are two projects that are in full gear right now, that were authorized last year. Infrastructure-wise, we're working on 2 miles on Nash Road from Sawmill Creek to Seward. We're hoping to kick the construction off in March. So that'll definitely, impede the traffic a little bit on Nash Road, but then we'll be complete with our 115 insulation upgrade on our transmission line. We're also in the engineering phase at the Spring Creek substation. So we got another meeting on Tuesday with the engineers, and we're trying to get through that design so we can get it to construction. And then the Long substation is fully designed and is ready for construction, most likely starting in September. So, and then we got the shore power substation, our large project to electrify the cruise ships. The substation has been moved from the port up to Fort Raymond. So the corner of Sea Lion and Diamond is where the shore power substation will be, with the battery energy storage system, which is a 12 megawatt, 2-hour battery, which would be great for the community as well. And then we have lots of smaller projects. We had Alaska Remote Imaging. I'm sure many of you ran into their tech that's been running around and GPSing all of our locations for the poles and all of our equipment, but they're complete with that. It's on kind of the back end processing, and we should have it live on February 17th, which that'll lead to better maintenance tracking, putting a project management plan together for 5 years, or capital improvement plans, and all the things that we need to manage a utility, and just having accurate mapping helps a lot day to day. And on that, I think we have a vehicle purchase coming up on the next council meeting for our mechanic vehicle, but it's our only vehicle purchase for the year. We got everything else in the budget taken care of already. Our hydro work on Marathon Hydro, we got the plant just about ready to go. The snow did come in. We'll have to kind of watch how the avalanche danger is on the side of the mountain, but our community partners, one of them was JAG, and so they rebuilt the intake manifold up for the Weir for half the price of buying a new one from the manufacturer. So we've had great community partnerships on that one, from Catalyst Marine, JAG Marine, and then Metco. And so if you've been up the Jeep Trail lately, you probably noticed that it's a brand new trail pretty much. We'll have to do a little tuning up on it this spring, but we're hoping by latest June having the plant up and running again, basically just waiting on that intake manifold to get installed. But yep, crews are doing great. You'll probably also notice that there's 130 new LED lights along 3rd Avenue. So the return on investment on just changing those over to LEDs is 5 months from the high pressure sodium. So that was, the crew did a great job. I think they look good. A few people said they're a little dim. And so if the community wants, we have them set on the lowest setting, so we can always crank them up if everyone wants brighter lights, but we'll kind of, figure out where to go from there. But anyway, we're not here to talk about this tonight, so I guess I'll pass it back to Brian.
Thanks, Taylor. The one thing I was, a brief update on the Clean Ports project. We do have the RFP went out for the ship to shore power facilities, I think on Monday. And so we'll expect to get bids back on that within the next 45 days. We're in preliminary design on the portion that runs from Fort Raymond, the battery energy storage system and the substation up there. We aren't certain whether we're going to go underground or overhead at this point in time from the station down to the shore power area. And we have a preliminary estimate, and we're kind of working through the details on that right now to make sure it fits within the budget, and to make sure that the battery energy storage system is in there. And as Taylor alluded to, that will significantly improve power quality in Seward during disturbances, like where trees get into lines or the line to Dates Creek trips. The system down here will just be a lot more rigid and be able to withstand those. So if you're in a commercial situation, you'll see less power fluctuations during this period of time. But the primary focus of that battery when the ships are in port is to allow us to integrate that in the load of these big cruise ships into the electrical grid seamlessly without swinging the voltage and currents around. And just kind of a tie-in, one of the important things is that the three projects that Taylor mentioned, Spring Creek, Lawing, and Nash Road Phase 2, that conversion has to be completed before we can turn up the battery energy storage system and the Clean Power Project. And the Clean Power Project, for those of you who aren't aware, we had a $45 million grant from the EPA that we're using to fund that. And there was a 10% match, which is being put up by the Seward company. And so, but all of that work has to be online by 12/31/28. And so we have to get the Spring Creek, Lawing, and Nash Road finished so that we can then energize and turn up the battery energy sources. And that aside, the reason we're here tonight, Mark Begich is our speaker. As I mentioned, he's the president and CEO of Northern Compass Group. Mark has a long history of municipal governance. Believe it or not, at age 26, while serving on the Anchorage Assembly, he worked on governance options for the Anchorage Telephone Utility, examining continued municipal ownership, sale, and independent authority and cooperative models. The work contributed to decisions made in the early 1990s regarding ATU's structure and eventual sale, and provides relevant historical context for the discussions we're having about the electric department here. Mark later served 10 years on the Anchorage Assembly and was the mayor of Anchorage from 2003 to 2007. He represented Alaska in the United States Senate from 2009 to 2014. Across these roles, he's worked in telecommunications, infrastructure, transportation, labor and workforce development, housing, economic development, and public sector governance. In the private sector, Mark has more than 40 years of business experience as an entrepreneur and CEO. His work includes mergers and acquisitions of public utilities and privately held companies, corporate restructuring, business turnarounds, capital raising, joint ventures, and equity investing. He currently leads Northern Compass Group and owns and operates resort and hot springs properties in Nevada, New Mexico, and Wyoming. He also serves on the executive board of the Anchorage Downtown Partnership. Most recently, Mark was lead on the concept and redevelopment of the Wild Birch Hotel, the old former Aviator Hotel, which opened in downtown Anchorage in 2025 on the site of the deteriorated property. The 252-room hotel is Anchorage's first lifestyle boutique hotel in 20 years and Alaska's first joint ventured by the Hyatt Hotel Group, serving as both a visitor base camp and community gathering space and as part of the revitalization of the Anchorage downtown area. Today, Mark will share the lessons he's learned in public leadership and governance, specifically related to historical municipal decisions and implications around utilities. With that, please welcome Mark Begich.
Hold down the button.
There we go. Thank you very much. And every event I've ever gone to in all my years, everyone sits in the back and never in the front. So I will, hopefully you'll catch everything. I appreciate it. Taylor, I have to tell you, how many LED lights did you say, 13? 130. So, you already dated me on how old I am, so thank you very much for that. But we did a project in Anchorage we had 8,000 lights. The cost benefit was unbelievable. And your point that you can pay these off in 5 months is incredible what this technology does. And I remember when I brought this project forward, because half the roads in Anchorage are state-owned, but the city manages the streetlights. And the other half are Anchorage-owned, and the city manages those. And when we went to DOT, no disrespect to DOT, let me start with that. We had to explain why we were doing this. They said, well, it's not in the design manual. I said, well, who writes the design manual? We do. Great, change it. And they said, well, no, can't do that. No. So we actually created a LED light conference, which we held in the bottom floor. Remember this, Shauna? Shauna worked for me back then. In the bottom floor of the Kevin Cooks, we invited some specialists from around the country, and we talked about new lighting standards, and DOT was invited, and it was like a little conference. Well, my real goal was change your design manual. So at the end of the day, the DOT guys came and said, hey, this sounds really interesting. We should change your design manual. Yes. And then result was the city saved a lot of money. on lighting. If you can imagine what you're saving on 130, and we had 8,000 of these lights. And the most interesting part was, when I was mayor, we owned an electrical company. And the last thing you want to do in an electrical company is reduce your consumption, because you're making money on the lights. So it was a conflict, really, of what we were trying to do here. So I tell you that because anything with utilities is not as simple, like, oh, you flip the lights on, lights go on. There's a lot more behind it. I want to start first with the telephone company. I was actually telling this story. I was on the Acreage Assembly, as mentioned, 26 years old, and within a couple of years, the concept of privatizing was the concept of the telephone company. And you have to take yourself back to those days. City received a license to do a thing called, before I got on the Assembly, not far before I got on the Assembly, to do two things. One, put some things in the ground called cable and have another channel than ABC, NBC, and CBS. People were like, and what did the city do? This was in the 80s. They said, well, no one's gonna do that. We don't need that franchise. Then rejected it, got rid of it. And I'm like, we look back now, that's the only thing that's really driving our technology today. Telephone was a thing called cell phones. No one really knew what they were. The city had a thing called MacTel, and it was their cellular company. And I will never forget this. I was at that point now, a couple of years in, we're in a meeting, and a couple of members of the city council assembly said, who's really gonna do that? Everyone has this copper line phone in their house. Who's gonna be on a phone all the time? And I remember, I was the youngest person there, so I'm like a little bit technology nerd to a certain extent. And I said, well, I think it's pretty cool. It's like Star Trek comes to your house. Are you kidding me? And we should just get rid of that MacTel thing. Now we hung on to it. And in the process of deciding, that's what started to trigger me to say, do we know as a city government how to run a telephone company in an evolving technology? Our biggest profit margin in the telephone company when the city had it was, can anyone guess? What unit of business was the most profitable for us? What's that? Phone book, the yellow pages. If I ask my son, do you know what a yellow page is? He'd look at me like I'm a lunatic. It was an enormous moneymaker for the city. Of course, today they don't exist. The cellular business was moving at a very rapid pace. And so Tom Fink got elected mayor. I was on the assembly. He wanted to privatize it. Some of us said, hey, wait, slow down. Let's think about this. Very controversial. What we all instinctively knew, based on our own experiences, we'd spend meetings at the assembly meeting, listening to the telephone company coming up and asking us to approve a bid for technology that no one understood what the hell they were talking about, but we said, oh, okay, sure, whatever, And then we'd have to deal with we had, at one point, I think 900 employees at the telephone company, massive. So we had to deal with all that labor issue, all these things. And it became apparent to us that we got to run this more efficiently. The technology is moving too fast. And so a group of us on the assembly, very bipartisan group, said, okay, let's think about this. So we ended up with we actually put three options on the ballot for the public. Because it was so controversial, no one could make a decision on what the right approach was. The community was very split. We had, back in the day, for those that might remember, there was Alascon, big teleprovider. We used to charge, our telephone company used to charge, if you lived in Anchorage and you called Girdwood, which was still in the municipality of Anchorage, 25 cents a minute. Same company, same jurisdiction, but you lived in Girdwood, so you must be out of the city, which you really weren't. But we had to figure this out. So we had bids, went out to bid. I think our first round was about $400-some million for the utility. Then we had on the ballot an authority, which is like kind of one step away from agency run. It gave a little more independence. It had a board of directors that would be appointed. It would be managed in a different way on purchasing rules. The assembly would not, and the mayor would not appoint at the utility. The mayor could appoint, I think there's 15 executive levels. So the mayor could appoint them, or the new mayor comes in, fires them all, appoints another group. So it was very volatile. And then we had components where they could pay more than the regular pay scale of a municipal employee. And the reason we did that was because to get a CEO for a company like that, the city could never compete. We'd get somebody, but we wouldn't get quality in the emerging technology. Assembly had a lot of controversy on that. So we couldn't get a decent pay scale, but we got a better one in the city. So we put that on the ballot at the same time. Then we had one more bid that came in. We had actually two, one never completed, but one other bid, which was an outside private group that wanted to buy it. And it was called Citizens Utility. And then the last one was the employee group. It was so large, they were thinking of an ESOP, an employee-owned business. And they decided not to put it forward because they had the challenge of thinking about how to raise capital, emerging technologies, how to keep the speed. And they thought they would have some problems because the group that was interested was the one that represented, obviously, in a union, most of the employees. So they thought that would not necessarily be healthy for them. So we ended up with three, went to the ballot, voters selected the authority. We ran that for a few years, and we did get really good professional board members. They didn't have to live in Anchorage either, because that was a restriction under our code that if you serve on the board of commission, you have to be from the area, be a resident, but you've got to get people from all around. I can't remember the gentleman's first name, but his last name was Hill. Very well versed in technology, incredibly well versed. After a couple of years, he came to us and said, "It's moving too fast. We'll never catch up to what's going on." And the capital, because you can only raise so much capital, and there needed to be injection. If you think about today with AI, you hear these huge numbers, billions being put into AI just to figure it out with very little return. And technology, and again, you got to take yourself back to that. I mean, Facebook didn't exist. All the streaming didn't exist. So the things were changing rapidly. And we also had this other challenge, frankly. We had the authority trying to do things, but then we had, in all due respect to my friend Ron Duncan with GCI, coming down to the assembly and making sure that the authority could not compete in certain areas. Why? Because they wanted to own that market. So we then collectively decided we got to sell it. We got to get it on the market and get out of this business, because we were spending so much time. We were losing our focus. When I got elected, I didn't get elected to manage a telephone company. I got elected to fix roads and make sure schools got funding and all those things that make a quality of life for people. And then we put it on the market. Now what happened? We didn't get 400 plus million. We got just shy of 300 in less than 2-3 years. Value. What was the biggest value holder for us? MacTel. They saw the future of MacTel, which then later this whole company ended up over time becoming ECS. So it evolved into this company. It was a good lesson, but also told me a lot about the ability for an agency to kind of move in a city government. So when I became mayor, I did two things. One was I looked at all our utilities and converted them by ordinance into authorities, kind of move them in one more step. The next mayor came along, changed them all back. I said, well, that's not working out so well. But when I was in the private sector, I got a chance to work on a project, which was MLP, and trying to figure out what to do with MLP. I was the mayor during almost 6 years, and I ran municipal light and power. That's as a CEO, I had a CEO there, but I was in charge. And oh my God, it was like one thing after another would come to me. One good example, I can't remember, do you work for Chugach at that time or not, I can't remember, but they were building a power plant. MLP, Municipal Light and Power, was building a power plant, and all I saw was overbuilding. I remember going to the think about this, I appointed the person who ran Municipal Light and Power. I go to him, and say, hey, why don't we co-locate our generation, power generation, cut costs, be redundant, blah, blah. Absolutely not. We have a different plan. What's the different plan? We're gonna be way over on the other side of town. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why don't we work together and then we don't overbuild power generation? No, that's not what we're gonna do. And you remember this, I mean, it probably cost the ratepayers a couple $100 million. This dumb decision. And they'd already been in motion, and I thought, we gotta change this. And during my time, we changed a few things to kind of manage it differently. But it really wasn't until after I was out of the mayor and the Senate, this opportunity came to me that I could help figure out municipal light and power and what they can do with it. The mayor, Berkowitz, at that time asked me to help, and Chuyach asked me to help, and I said, let's figure it out. It took 5 years, 4 years, almost like 4 or 5 years to go through the process. But Northern Cummins Group, we put our resources to it. We had to do everything in our power to kind of get out there. It was really a merger between municipal light and power and Chuyach. And why is that important from a municipal standpoint? Because we spent so much energy, literally, on an element of the city government that wasn't our main focus. City government, in my view, is make sure the roads are good, all these things that we do every day. And this was sucking the life out of us because we'd be in controversies or we'd be bonding for several $100 million and all these issues. And so, municipal light and power, I had a chance to do it. Now, this had been tried 4 or 5 times before. And it was really because of 2 organizations that didn't like each other. But yet, they're providing the most important thing to a city, which is power. And they were in conflict all the time. So we saw a moment to figure out how to merge these 2 together, create lower rates, more capacity, more innovation with the company. And at the end of the day today, I think it was a great move. The city value on that, I think it was about $1 billion after they did their debt, pay off everything else. A chunk of that money goes into a trust fund that helps to offset property taxes and be available for a new program for the city. But one thing we did, I will tell you, if you decide down the road, if you're a co-op or you keep it or you sell it, if you go to that latter mode, me, Charles Warforth and I on the Senate, we set up this trust fund back in the ATU days because we thought this would happen. When we sold that $270 million, a lot of money back then for the telephone utility, the city would just blow it. So we put it into a trust fund that's managed professionally, like a permanent fund, and it produces money. Now it's up to $400 or $500 million or more because we've added municipal light and power money to it. It's actually a great long-term benefit. But all of them have benefits, and they also have things that, like I said on the telephone utility, the benefit was we got money out of it by selling it. By the authority, when we did the authority not fully sold, the benefit was we got all the appointments, only one, it was down to 1 for political appointment. So we got all that politics out of it. So they do have there's positive and negative, everything you do. Co-op, selling, own it yourself. And I agree with what Brian said. I think business as usual in this business of electrical is rapidly changing also. And if you're not thinking about the future 10 years out, you're in trouble. And again, we all can probably sit here and think about that. But the people who make the decisions, because I served on the Senate, I served as mayor, we usually are thinking short term. So the long game is hard because you got to think, if we would have got rid of MacTel and kept the yellow pages, can you imagine the value of ATU when we got ready to sell it? It'd probably be 100 million, 150. We'd have lost 300 million on that deal. So it's a tough call when you're in this type of business. It's different than water and sewer to a certain extent. The most advanced thing on water and sewer has been SCADA systems. But those things are different. Garbage disposal, different. But these kind of utilities, we're having this debate in the city with some folks about the port. What do we do? Do we own it? Do we not own it? What's happening here? But when it comes to these type of utilities, the emerging technology will outpace most government thinking, because there's no two ways about it. And I was one of those, I was a believer that ATU should stay as a publicly owned utility. I fought it the first time, and we were successful the second time. I jumped into the next question of authority, because I was very cautious. I thought this is gonna be destroyed. We'll lose our ability to be locally owned, locally operated, our employees, all those things. With municipal power, that was a little different, because it joined up with a co-op. So it had that process. It's very engaging, except as we were joking about co-ops, sometimes they don't turn out the vote. If we think our elections have low turnout, co-op, I think you guys are around 10, 11% turnout. So you gotta really think about these things. And then you have to also think as individuals of a community, where do you wanna spend your time? Because utilities can drive you into a lot of time loss, because you're just gonna spend a lot of time thinking of these things. Or do you do it in a way that you can spend your time and use the utility as an asset for economic growth or quality of life growth? I'll end there, because you probably have some questions. I know some came in earlier, but I'll try to answer them. But I've been through those wars. The worst one was the telephone utility, because you had GCI, Alaskan, IBW union, outside forces, inside forces. It was political turmoil, frankly. But I think Dundee City made the right decision.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. And I think there were some questions that had come in, and I wanted to walk through them. I think you've covered many of them. I think you covered like the practical challenge you saw when managing a city department, speed of decision making. That was one of the questions we had. The relationship between an independent authority and a cooperative model, as opposed to direct city ownership. I think you've covered those pretty well. I guess one thing is, what new challenges do you think, like forming a cooperative or an authority, what new challenges will that bring to the community from your perspective? What, we see what the benefits are. Maybe you get a leaner, meaner machine, but there's there are cons to that, and what you're thinking. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, when we did the authority, the biggest first challenge was crafting it in a way that created more independence, because everyone had their views what that means, how to define independent. Our goal was we had to work through a process of setting what we call principles. Okay, what's the goal? More independent, more professionally run, less politics. So as long as we kept answering that question, everything we were talking about, then we got to a good ordinance, good resolution, and then getting the voters to buy into it was important. It's like what you've done here. You said this is your third meeting, right? This is a really good process, because what you're doing here is you're engaging the public the way we did on the authority, which this would have been a better approach to start, frankly. Because we just put it on the ballot. That was our public engagement, which, I'd go out to meetings and people say, I'd never heard about this before, and I get tortured. And then the ones that said, oh, I heard about this, why are we even here tonight? So you get this extreme differences. So that was a challenge. Then making sure on the authority, it was all about accountability, because you still had to have some oversight. And how much did you reach in without managing the authority as an elected body? On the co-op, the biggest challenge I think there is, and I just kind of alluded to it, is once you do the co-op, people say, oh, someone will take care of that. Well, no, a co-op is you. So you have to participate. Otherwise, 10%, you got your example, I'm not going to cut 90,000,
90, yeah.
Yes, that means 9,000 people, really half of them, 4,500, because all it takes is simple majority to pass certain things. 4,500 people decide what 90,000 people are receiving. So when you think of a co-op, you must participate. There's not like someone else will do it, especially in a smaller community, because you know everybody, everyone's doing all kinds. Usually people wear 10 hats and doing all kinds of stuff here. In Anchorage, we have the ability to get people to participate in authority, but a co-op, you have to think about that. The other thing is, and I won't say this is an issue anymore, because I think, and we talked about it briefly, and that is there's ability to raise capital. It doesn't matter if you're that's one of the things, what does your capital expenditure do? What do you got to improve on a facility? And doing that, you got to raise capital. And in the markets today, it's easier to raise capital than it used to be, because there's a lot more fluid cash, a lot more investors, different rate structures. but there's more of that. I would have said that was a challenge. Not sure it is as much anymore, because I think there's a lot more flexible money out there. The other is, in either one of those two, you must have a pay scale that attracts who you need to run this utility. It's a business, it's highly technical, and if you get the wrong people, you will pay the price. There's no two ways, especially in a smaller community, because you have, in Anchorage, you kind of spread it, that cost over 300,000 people. You don't get to do that here. It's a smaller group. So you gotta be really, you make one mistake that's expensive, it's not one that goes away overnight. And you can't carry it for a few years, you end up carrying it for a lot of years. So that's the part of either one of those. But with a co-op, you gotta commit. And that's hard for a lot of people today because they're so busy doing so many other things, but that's a requirement. I mean, otherwise you have a few running it. And even the co-ops have challenges. MEA and Chugach used to go through these battles with the union, the non-union supporters, the union supporters. They'd have big campaigns fighting each other, because remember, co-op members get elected. And so that becomes, a challenge.
Thanks. I guess the wrap-up question, if you had one piece of advice to offer communities considering utility governance changes, what would it be? What's the magic? The magic bullet.
Yeah, I don't know if there's magic. Well, first is getting informed, and you're doing that. I think, especially in a smaller community, because it is such an important part of what you have or what you can do. I mean, what you talk about with the port here, power is critical for the port to operate and bring in customers, which means business to your community. And if you don't have that done right, then you're going to pay a price. So being informed about all the options is, I think, a huge benefit. The second and last thing I'd say on what's the one thing, even though you said one, I'm giving two. The other thing I'd say is you're going to hear extreme views on either side on this issue. Sort out the facts from what you have. If you don't get it, ask for it. I've been in too many meetings on these kinds of issues after the fact, so I didn't know that. And they said, did you go to meetings? Yeah. Then just ask the question. No, in this format, it gives you a chance to do that. So asking questions and obviously being prepared to, whatever decision you make, you will be part of that.
Thanks a million. I feel like we should clap or something. Somebody should do that. I guess just kind of to follow on from Mark's last comment is, as far as questions, obviously come up and ask them tonight. We'll have a microphone. We're willing to answer any questions that we can, and if we can't answer them, we'll get back to you on it. But I also would encourage you to write your questions down and drop them by the electric department. Go to our website and keep an eye on what we're doing. Over the next several months, we'll be putting stuff together to help you make better decisions.
So you talked about selling utility, and you talked about turning it into co-op and the pros and cons. What about selling it to a co-op? Maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's very similar to what we did. Thank you for that. It's very similar to what we did with Municipal Light and Power and Chugach, because Chugach is a co-op. So having those two, there's advantages with co-ops when you partner with them, or they're the end result. They get different financing rates, they have different flexibility to a certain extent, and your members are participants, right, at the end of the day. So with Chugach and Municipal Light and Power, is kind of the best of both worlds. We get it out of the politics of, who's the mayor, who's on the assembly, who's the majority, all that stuff. That was just causing all kinds of issues. And out of taking all the executives that were all appointed, which was also a problem. But then you merge it to a co-op, which in this case, that co-op purchased the utility. And they end up, it took 2 years, I think, of transition, if I remember this right. Either anything you do in that's going to take time of transition. Depending on who you do it with, you've had both the large co-ops and the small co-ops here. Depending on who, that's the likely people of those groups, who has the financial capacity, who has the capital, and then do they bring something of value to you? What I mean by that, just being a co-op is a value, but just merging with them is what does it get you? Does it get you a rate structure that's better? Does it get you economy of scale? Does it get you some new technology they're doing that you want to play off of? I think you had Kodiak here, which is huge in wind energy. I mean, it's unbelievable what they're doing. So, you want to look at that as part of your decision, if that's one of the decisions. But frankly, I think, it took us 5 years to get there because it required public vote, co-op vote, a lot of internal work. We had to figure out the union issue because there's same union, two different scales and wages. We had to merge all that stuff together. And that took some work, to say the least. And then we had to go out to the public. And what we found, the public was actually asking us when we got to the vote, why did it take you so long? I was like, we've been trying this for 4 different times and you didn't want to do it. So it's kind of like, okay, we did this right. Because we gave them benefits, but we're very clear on what they were going to get. And that was, it was a great experience, and I think the city, Anchorage, is better off for it because we have a more unified system and we're not saying, oh, you're not in downtown, so therefore Chugach can't come in, or you're in South Anchorage and Municipal Light Power can't come in. It was like, we'd have power line issues. It was just weird. It was, you could be on the same street and have 2 different sets of power lines. What was that? I think it was a very good experience, but there was a lot of due diligence, and we even had a business committee at the beginning that got together, got consultants, and said, is this the right thing to do? And like I said, at the end of the day, I was like shaking my head, and people coming to me, why didn't you do this sooner? Because you didn't want it. That's why. So it was a very interesting kind of hybrid, you might say. Oh, okay.
What year did you start, and then what year was the transfer from the authority to
It was about mid-90s, but it was literally two and a half years later. It was very quick. For the HE telephone company, we were real.
I'm sorry, not the telephone company.
Utility? I want to say that had to be 2015, 2016, I think. Is that right, Brian? Because it was just after I was coming out of the Senate. Yeah, I think it was 20. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It took 5 years, sorry.
Yeah. 2015 and
We closed in October of 2020.
yeah. So it was very recent. Yeah. And the dynamics were changing also in the electrical business because renewables were really, think about 2015 and then prior to that, people talked about renewables, but now they're accelerating everywhere. Some of them, they're cheaper. They produce cheaper than they used to be. I shouldn't say cheaper than some gas. I will be frank about that. But there's new technologies that are coming. These micro-nuclear plants are very interesting in what they might do. There's tidal being studied right here, out in the inlet. All that is kind of out there. But very recent. And it was something. There wasn't, I wish it was a straight, smooth line. As all the engineers that I had to work with wanted, it was like this. Because people also had, blessed talk radio. There was a lot of just, this is going to crush the city, or someone's really behind this that's not telling us, it's things like that. But we just kept telling people, here's the facts. Here's what it is. You make the call. And if you don't like it, off we go.
We also spent about 1.5 years in front of the Regulatory Commission.
That's right.
After we got the sale consummated, we borrowed the money.
Yeah, that's right.
So there was a long regulatory process.
Yeah, because they were looking out for the consumer and making sure price points, because there's a lot of commitments made about rates.
Yeah, hi. My name is Bob Barnwell. I'm actually on the city council. Well, first question I have is, do you guys ever have fun? You seem like these kind of things take so much work of hammering out all these details.
This is fun. That's the problem. Some of us think this is fun.
I don't know what to say about that. I actually find this topic super fascinating also. The first question, I have a few. One, can you define what an authority is? Because you use that term, I'm not sure.
Yeah. The best way to describe an authority is it's a professionally run organization It has very little politics in it, meaning you shift away from political appointments of the running of the agency. And second, it has flexible purchasing rules, payroll rules, meaning salaries, you can go higher. And you have bonding capacity that you can utilize both tax-free and non-taxable. That's the gist of it. But it's really about, you're gonna run independent. We're not gonna micromanage you. For example, I'm sure you get contracts from the utility that you gotta approve, and some you look at it and go, what is this part for? And they start explaining it, and you go, yeah, okay, that's enough. I'm in, so you get rid of all that, which the amount of time we freed up at the city assembly, when I was on the assembly, when we did ATU, it was a breath of fresh air. Because now we were focused on parks, roads, public safety, education.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, that helps. Just a little background, of course you know that we went up for a sale a couple of years ago, and that failed closely. I think the public perception in Seward was that for years the utility had made money in the city. We're finding out now that it was probably only because we had so much deferred maintenance, and then we're really actually getting caught up with that now. Being on council, I completely agree with you that because we're on 3-year terms and it's rotating all the time, and some of the people frankly have no interest in it. It's technical and it's difficult to manage, and it's just not in their wheelhouse. So I really do agree with that idea that the council's not a good fit for managing a utility. And I like that idea of authority. So the other issue I have as a city council member is just looking at this going, we have these opportunities. We're really lucky to have Brian and Taylor. I think we're just phenomenally lucky to, I think we had a good manager, Kat really courted these guys, and it worked. It's been working really well. And hopefully we can keep Taylor, if not Brian, for a long time. But
I think they're negotiating with you right now.
Oh yeah. Well, maybe not Brian. I think Brian wants to have more fun.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. But if we don't, the thing, because I do remember that at Cordova they had a long-term manager, someone that stayed there for years, and that was part of their success story. So we would have to keep Taylor a long time. Hopefully he meant to that.
Well, they're really like, don't respond, I'll negotiate for you.
Yeah, right. Actually, it's a negotiating tactic. But I guess what we're conflicted with is we have some potential here for some hydropower. We like our autonomy, and I'm personally nervous about the fact that Railbelt is in a situation of running out of fuel and is going to import their gas. And it's kind of nice to have our autonomy and maybe have this hydropower and stay neutral or separate from them, and even maybe sell some power back in acreage. But that takes maybe a qualified authority, and we're a small town. We don't have that many people that have the interest or the technical ability to manage this. So can you just comment on that?
Yeah, and I will say this, that the authority component, you have that membership, I think we had 5 on that board, maybe 7. They have to be very good at what they do, because you have now entrusted them to run an asset of yours, the city's asset, and run in a way that has a value. And what happens, you just said it, and this is very interesting. Publicly owned facilities, they'll always tell you they're doing the deferred maintenance, they're doing it. What I just heard Taylor say, which is great, that he's getting all these backlogs. But the word was backlog. Because what happens is they get pressure. Well, what are you returning to us? Meaning the government or the people. And when they say, well, nothing, we're providing power, and all you see is your rates go up, you're kind of like, I'm not sure this is in our interest. Now, going to an authority, it is a tough call to get the right people to serve on that board the right way, because we had designated seats. I think we had an engineer, a business person. We did put a union person there, because like 80% of our workforce was unionized over there. And I can't remember the other two. We might have had a citizen and one other. But they got to dedicate time. it's no different than a co-op board in a way, because, you know, you sign up, you run, you get on a co-op board, and they tell you the next thing they go, yeah, so I'm meeting a month late. Oh, great, I'll run. Next thing you know, they have 3 subcommittees through the month. Then they have an employee committee. Then you have a training session. Then you have a conference. And before you know it, both groups, it doesn't matter if it's an authority or a co-op, you're very busy. So you gotta be willing to spend the time. And that's what you asked what the biggest challenge of these are. That's it. And you have to be learned on it. You gotta know this information. Because when you're sitting down and you're the board, and you've hired hopefully a good executive, they're gonna bring you things like a bond package that they're gonna bring to buy whatever, you know, to upgrade their equipment. And these are not usually, you know, a few $100,000. When you're buying the equipment they will need for power generation, it's in the millions. So you gotta be really aware of those things. But I'm always, you know, I'm a very, like I said, when I got on Assemblyman, I didn't want not one of those utilities sold to anybody. But it didn't take me long to figure out, oh my God, what are we doing here? Because I'd be in those meetings, we had 11. And I remember the day we were debating in 1990 the purchase of one electric van. 2 nights, an hour and a half about on each night, to talk about one electric van. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I don't know about this electric stuff back then, you know, kind of like what? And I'm thinking, okay, I spent 3 hours of about 8 hours of evening meetings on one thing. It was $110,000. That's the whole debate was on. And we had a $250 million budget. What was I doing? You know? So again, I think it's your point is a good one. Who you get on there is important, and how they're selected. In this case, it was still selected by the assembly and the mayor. Mayor appointed, assembly confirmed, but we had a higher threshold of kicking someone off. They couldn't just do it because they became a mayor. They had to get 8 of the 11 assembly members to kick anyone off that board. That was a very high threshold, and it protected quality people. Maybe they disagreed politically with the mayor that may came in later, but we needed the quality. So that's the, if you're gonna do it, authority, you're still gonna have someone has to appoint them. And if you do it, you've gotta make sure you have a high enough threshold of the city council who confirms those, that they just can't come in and be mayor and kick everyone off. Because you'll create the same instability you had as a public home.
Thank you for coming down to talk to us about this.
Sure.
I have 2 quick questions. One is, could you touch bases on where money could come from if we were to purchase this as a co-op, and people inside and outside the city? And second of all, right now we're unregulated. If we were a co-op, would we be regulated?
Aren't you regulated down here?
No.
Yeah, there's
So-
a piece of it. Go ahead.
We are, you know, Seward is regulated from a reliability
Yeah.
and a service territory perspective. We're not economically regulated, so
Yeah.
we set our own rates. And going forward, we could continue to set our own rates. It requires, the statute allows co-ops to either be regulated or not regulated.
Right.
Most of the co-ops are in the rail belt, all the co-ops in the rail belt, not Seward, not Cordova, Copper Valley, or Kodiak. They're unregulated. But the rail belt utilities are, the rail belt co-ops are. For them to unregulate, the bar is very high. So going into the process, if you were to form a co-op, you would want to, my recommendation is we're too small to be regulated. You know, the
Right.
co-op board could should regulate it, because the cost of sitting in front of the regulatory commission is huge. I mean, you have a lot of attorneys and consultants on staff who are down there making your case to RAPA, the Regulatory Affairs and Public Advocacy Office.
Which you pay for too.
Which you pay
You
for
pay for it all.
differently.
No,
You know,
you pay for the people opposing you.
yeah,
That's how it
they're on the
works.
other side of the table picking you apart, and you pay their salaries. It's hard to, yeah. So just, that's the one thing I would say about that. Yeah. And from a financing perspective, as a co-op, you have 3 primary sources available. The RUS, which is Rural Utility Services, that's federal. They have very low interest rates, but fairly complex rules. There's also the CoBank, which is a cooperative bank. They have very favorable rates and very few rules. And CFC, which is the Cooperative Finance Corporation. And those are both national organizations that fund electric cooperatives. So if you were to go the co-op route, and we've had, just to test the waters, we had some preliminary discussions with CFC as well as CoBank. You know, and they do things like what we're doing right here. They haven't given us any, we haven't said we're going that way, we haven't said we're going that way, we haven't given them any information financially, but they have in the past funded up things like this. So we do know that we're not foreclosed there.
Yeah. And you can also tap in the private market. It's just,
Absolutely.
it's more expensive.
You can go out, you know, I mean, absolutely. I mean, when we did the $885 million for ML&P, we went to the private market, and actually they beat the 30-year treasury by
It was unbelievable.
50 basis points. I mean, you know, there's money out there. This is a very much smaller deals, would be much smaller deals, so I'm not sure how that would all shake out.
Yeah.
Right. And I bet you if Seward were to become co-op, there would be more than 10% show up for voting. Electric is a big, big subject here. And don't let the low turnout tonight discourage you.
No. I'm just, here's what I do know. I don't know what your municipal election turnouts are like. Someone might know that number, I don't know. But 35%. There we go, 35%. So that will be at best your peak. I'm just telling you, based on our experience of small communities and large communities, what I've seen. Why I want that on the table is because then you have to think about, you got to get more involved. People, you know, it's just that it's not a negative in the sense for the people, it's just everyone's so busy, right? You know, everyone's working or has to work, or you got all kinds of stuff going on, or you got kids to take care. I mean, it's just, and before you know it, it doesn't matter if it's an authority or a co-op, you got a lot of responsibility. But there are people who will want to do that. And you just want, as a community, to think about that as you get down that path. I think the question back here from this gentleman was a good one. Like, okay, you may have a lot of people interested, but you got to make sure they are the ability and the qualifications you need to take the utility where it needs to go, whatever that is. And as a community, you'll decide that, right? You might say, we just want to be a basic utility with 30% renewable or something. But you may also say, in 10 years, we want to be 90% renewable, like Kodiak, right? And you may say, okay, how are we going to do that? That's a whole different ballgame, right? But those are decisions as you decide what route you go. Those are the questions you need to ask yourself so you know which route can get you there. Because I always believe this, if you have the goal, the route is not as important. You've got to figure out what you want. If you want to be like Kodiak, and I always use Kodiak because I've been there several times, I'm just amazed what they've done. And, you know, they have the largest Coast Guard base in the country, fed by wind energy, hydro. I mean, it's unbelievable. But if you know here's your goal, here's where you want to go, then the route will become apparent to you. I really believe that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I like the forward thinking in the world, and I think that that's something that we really need to focus on. I live outside the city limits, and it's challenging on the electrical because we really don't have a voice. And the people that vote within the community have that and are making decisions for a lot of folks that live outside of it. One of the things that I often think of, and when we looked at this before, was cybersecurity was a really big thing. And I often think about that because I work with technology quite a bit, and I guess my concern is how prepared is the utilities of Seward for something that is cybersecurity moving forward as things change and we look at utilities being available in you know, they're not in very large state areas. You know, what could happen to us, and then would we be able to come back from that? I guess too, it's having that voice and the people outside. There's a whole lot of utility use, and when it comes to having a voice or a vote, I think the people would really like to have that.
Thank you. I think there might have been two questions in there, and I'll.
Yeah,
I'll kind of
cybersecurity and a
and
voice from
voice.
outside the city.
So maybe I'll start with cybersecurity. You know, Seward has a seat on the Rev Up Reliability Council. I'm in that seat. The Rev Up Reliability Council has completed what are called critical infrastructure protection standards, and they are based on the National Electric Reliability Corporation standards. Those are the standards for the grids in the lower 48. We currently are engaging a contractor to do a gap analysis between our current cybersecurity practices and those that are required in the what we call the SIP standards, critical infrastructure protection. Those standards have been approved. They were developed through working groups under the RRC, approved by the governing board of the RRC, and then subsequently approved by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. And this is a place where we actually are regulated under that. You know, we're not economically regulated, but we're required to meet those standards. And so we're working the gap analysis on that, and when we completed that, which should be in the next couple months, we'll develop a schedule to close any gaps that we find, and then a budget to accomplish that schedule, and then we'll execute on that, and that's an ongoing process. So that's sort of how we're addressing cybersecurity right now. That's one side of it, and that also addresses physical security of the power plant and substations. There's both a cybersecurity side of the SIP standards and a physical security side. As far as the in-town, out-of-town, and I think it's an important differentiator. You know, in the municipality of Anchorage, at the time ATU and MLMP were sold, let me back up. Prior to, I think, 1973, there was a city of Anchorage and a borough, much as there is here. And there was, you know, an electric utility in the city, which was Municipal Light Power. There was a cooperative outside the city, which was Chugach. But by the time, and Anchorage Telephone Utility served people much like the city of Seward does, both within the city of Anchorage and in the borough. But by the time the transformations in governance for ATU and subsequently MLMP occurred, the borough and the city had merged into the municipality, and there was only one governance. So that challenge didn't really exist in the way that it does here in Seward. You did have Eagle River, which was served by MTA and Matanuska Telephone and Matanuska Electric, but they had their own co-ops and out there. You know, it wasn't like you had this group that was sort of disenfranchised as the folks outside the city. Maybe that's a strong word, but the folks outside the city who don't have a voice. So that's a little bit of a difference, and you know, and I think these were all parts of the equation that you all need to think about in your as you move forward and as we move this process forward. And, that all goes into the mill, and over time we'll make a decision. But it's a good point.
And I guess that goes to what I said just before that was, you got to know what you want long term, and then the path will become more apparent. Because if one of the goals is everyone should have a voice, okay, that's one goal. Is it we just want money for it and forget what happens, or we want a hybrid of that, or we want renewables, whatever those things are, that will all guide you to this answer. And I think that having these options in front of you give you a little bit of it. And no option is perfect, but there may be pieces of each option. That's how we looked at this. When the question was asked, how long ago did we do the authority? And authorities didn't exist when we created the law. We said, why not? Let's try something different. And we looked at other places around the country and picked pieces here and there, and we started to craft it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Don't assume this A, B, C is your choice. A, B, C is what's going on today, or in the past. It gives you information to decide where you want to go.
Hi, my name is June. I live here in Seward. I have lived in a village that had one of the last privately owned electric companies. I've also lived in other places where there were electrical co-ops. And what I'm really excited right now for Seward is the hydro projects. I think that's awesome. And I'm thinking also, I've been in situations where I've been served by organizations that I had no say in. So I think if there was some way or another to be able to come up with a solution so everybody that's on our power grid could have representation equally, and also we could have an authority that got together and ran it, so that if something come up, I really, really like what Taylor has said in different venues about what he's doing and how open he is about that. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So my question is, with having experience with these three different, what could we do to incorporate so everybody has a word, and we're able to keep it within our area, and we're able to upgrade the hydropower?
Maybe that's not a question we can answer tonight, but I think probably a question that, you know, this process will answer at the end of the day. I think Mark really hit on a key topic, you know, and it's how I do most of the things in my life, and I think many of you are probably the same way. I always analogize it to, you know, if I'm heading off into the wilderness, you know, I pick a point, a mountain or something, and I'm going that direction. You know, by the time I get there, I may not even end up at that mountain. I might end up over here. You know, there's going to be rivers and hills and animals and things I've got to cross and things I can't cross, but the route becomes available to you, and you end up in a place that is somewhere near where you set off to be. And I think as a community over the next few months, what we really want to draw from the community is this, you know, what really is important? Is it local government? Is it low cost? Is it renewable? Is it individual, you know, individual control, or I don't mean control, but independent generation of power? Is it keeping jobs locally? Those are the specific types of things that will set that place in the distance, the place in the distance that we're going to head to. So I don't have all the answers, but I think that we will all get there together over the next months as we, you know, we will. I believe that in the next meeting we will bring some alternatives to you that have. We'll try to make them as apples and apples as we can, apples to apples comparisons, and somewhat generic, so we're not naming names and pointing to people or things, so that people can make those decisions. So, perfect question. I think you're asking the question that Mark is saying you've got to ask. You know, what is it we want to be when we grow up? That's, you know, what do I want to be when I grow up? I'm not sure yet. I know it's out there, so.
And I would add one other element that it's important, you know, you're talking about the utility today, but you're Seward residents, you're community residents. How does it fit into what you think the community should be? Is the utility a major component? Is it a component that adds to it? Is it a component that is there that can be utilized? Because you may have this issue thought about, but how does that work with this bigger picture? Because as a resident of the area that's served by the utility, you know, what do you want to do to make your community even better than it is today? That's what you always have to think about. How does it contribute to the next layer, the next level we want to get to? And that's an important part. If you think about the utility structure, then you have to ask this one last question. If we solve that, does that help us with other things that you want to do? Because if it doesn't, then you have to rethink that. That's just, because otherwise you're doing it in isolation. As a community, everything's connected. You know, if you decide to do the utility a certain way and it offers low rates, well, does that help economic development? Does it help residents stay here? You know, all those things that it contributes to.
Bruce Shaffa, outside city limits. I will say that I pay utility bills for 5 different utilities, so I get a chance to see a variety of
Sorry about that.
organizations. Well, no, I'm happy to do it. My wife would say that I should say something positive. Thank you for coming down. The weather's better than it was yesterday. I'm a little disappointed, frankly, that we only have one council member, also a media source. This should be more attended by more of our elected people in Seward. I would also say that I do serve on a board, an advisory board. There's nothing that keeps ratepayers who live outside of the city limits, nothing to keep them from coming and speaking to the city council. So they do have a voice. They need to understand that that voice needs to be applied. We talked about low voting percentages. There's no excuse for it. So, in today's world, we talk about takeaways. I'd like to believe that I understand correctly. Three of the major ones that you mentioned, Mark, were a long-range view. This would be important aspects for utility. A long-range view, remove volatile politics from decision-making, and a management team budgeting that is outside of typical public service budgets. It's one of the major problems. In Seward, I got here in 1975, 11 years after the earthquake. The people who were making decisions, like my friend Willard Dunn, had long-range vision. They saw down the road. They knew where this utility wanted to go, and they had people like Bill Casey and others who were there for the long run. They were not maybe sophisticated outside of the city, but they knew they wanted to make this thing work. So tonight, listening to your presentation of an alternate management organization was enlightening to me, because this is sort of what I imagined. I don't like the idea of selling the utility. Later we'll advocate one way or another, but you know, I really appreciate the openness and the gathering of information. So, question, when do we establish the value for this utility? Taylor and Brian are doing a tremendous job of completing some capital projects, getting past the deferred maintenance. It's got to be increasing the value of the utility. Is that a negative or positive for potential sale or merge into a co-op?
If you do, this is one area where you want to be careful with your transparency on this one. Here's why. Depends who values it, right? They may value it on book value plus, which means very low value, because you depreciate things out, so forth. You have something, if you ever, like we did, with, you know, think about it, back in the mid-90s, cell phones really weren't catching up, but we knew we could market the value of it. We knew we could explain there's more value here that's on the books. So if you get an appraisal or some sort of financial, what happens in that situation is for you, let's say, or the community, they're not going to think about that, because that's not how they look at things. But a buyer looks at them differently. For example, strategic buyers might say, you know what, it's worth this, but I'm going to pay more because strategically it works with us. Citizens United on ATU, for example, they saw it as an opportunity to be a foothold in Alaska. So they were willing to pay a little more. Then, of course, Alaskans said, well, we don't want you to pay more. They figured they would move the price up. They knew it was strategic, right? Because Alaska had so much of the business. So for them, they could pay more. What was interesting was GCI didn't want to be a bidder. They should have been, because they grew like crazy. And so I think there's a way to do value, but the danger of that is if you're thinking you want to sell it, and your buyer knows what you've appraised it at, because you're a public entity, unless you put an executive session and create it as proprietary or to the harm of the community value, it becomes public. And therefore they know, oh, that's what you think it's worth. So you gotta be real careful, but there are ways to get value and understand it in a way that keeps it flexible enough. But I'd be very careful, because if you're in the sell mode, or even in the merger mode, you want to be very careful with that. Because your job, let's say you go into that mode, your job for your community is to get the highest value and the best benefits. Lower cost, keep employees, all those things. On the flip side, you also want to get as much as you can for your community. So you want to be very, I mean, as we know with the MLP-2GETS merger, that's what was going on. And at one point, we were down to a few little issues. And I still don't know how the drug treatment facility fit into this at the end of the day, but it did. And the city got a $15 million drug treatment facility. So it's if that makes sense. I know it's, you know, one thing about this process that's been fantastic is I said it, you said it, all of us have said it, you know, it's very open. You're getting a lot of information, but if you make that decision, even if you want to test that decision, there's ways to test it to check value without having to put your cards on the table. Never negotiate against yourself. But you'll know in that situation, you're going to say, here's the 5 things I want for the community, right? And usually it's rates, employees, all those kind of things. And then it's the other side is, how much can we get? You set those parameters, that's what you want to send a message to buyers, because then they'll know.
You gotta be pretty careful with that. I mean, a WAG estimate to understand where you're at versus disclosing the actual value. It's somewhere between the two.
It's somewhere between. That's why you will have to say at one point, you know, the body that can do that is your elected body, because they can go into executive session, because if they disclose that, it could harm the finances of the city, right? So they have an argument in executive session. But then as a community, what are you gonna say? Well, what is it? You know, you're gonna bang on their heads, saying you're not telling us the value. But that's where this process, I think, is creating this trust level, hopefully over time, that you can get there.
Could you just go back over why that initial organization structure, which was a self-governing but within the city, failed, and you wound up having to go back to sell it?
We couldn't keep the pace of technology. The board, no matter how much they tried, because they were part-time board members, you know, they couldn't keep up with it. And the sense when you were competing against, you know, the Sprints, the AT&Ts, and all these huge companies, because their board members, you know, a board member on a corporation like that gets paid a couple $100,000 a year. We were paying ours, I think, $1,000 a month or $500, and they prioritize, right? And that's the tough part, because the other companies, this is what they do every day, and that's where we just couldn't. I mean, now I'm going to tell you, the board felt like they could do, but we saw the results financially. I bless their soul. They worked hard. It's just, you know.
If I can just follow up something Mark was said earlier, but I think, you know, the question about valuing it, when you value it, and the fact that if you go down that road, or if the council wants to test that, it won't be a public piece of information, but what you can be assured is once we brought the community together and we have a goal, whatever that goal is, that will be how we determine that value. And so I think that's the importance of knowing that mountain peak you're headed for. You know, maybe you gotta cross a lot of big rivers, but that's where we're going. And I can maybe not tell you how we're gonna do it. I may not be able to tell you how I did it once I get there, but we are headed in the right direction.
No, it's hard.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And that target will be known by buyers. So they will value it. They'll say, no, these guys don't care about local controls. What are we gonna do about that? Or they think the rates need to be dealt with. Okay, how are we gonna do that? And so it becomes apparent, and by that fact alone, value goes up. That's how that works.
Hi, I'm an inside city limits person, and I get to vote on behalf of all the other people that don't get to vote, that are part of the utility. It's kind of a bone of contention, so I really look forward to seeing an opportunity to have everybody at the table and being represented in the form of whatever we decide, selling it or a co-op. By the way, thank you for coming here. This is really interesting, and seeing this, you know, what you went through and hearing your experience. And I was wondering if you could speak to how you presented the utility for sale to all the different bidders, and because it was said before that we thought it was worth more and this, that. I think the bigger problem that we had when we ended up voting on this twice, I actually voted for and then voted against, and it was because of the transparency issue, and it seemed like a sole source bid offer to one entity. And so how did you manage that and entertaining the different bidders? And I totally get the idea of these leverage points, And you can do that, but I also can see where you don't wanna have too much out there in the wings, otherwise you could ruin the whole negotiation process too, so.
And you want them to compete,
Yes, yeah.
right? Because, here's the first thing you always gotta remember, it doesn't matter what you do in life, if you have your home, you think, oh, it's worth more, and then you get a lower bid, what happened, what's, because we always believe what we have is worth more. I mean, this is the way it is. I mean, there's a few things I think are worth less than I have, but that's another story. So that, what we did, the assembly, when it got time for sale, we did a resolution that laid out what our, here's what we expect. That was the policy. Then the mayor's people put together, I can't remember, we did an RFI, request for information for a city who might be interested. That was one step. And that's a formal process, right? People submit, it's a bid process, they give you information, you review it. Then we went to an RFP, request for proposal. But those items at the assembly, which drew from the community, was kind of the baseline. Right? Not a number, but here's what we expect. Now, we also had, I can't remember who it was at that time, we had an investment banker, big company, representing our interest, because, I'm involved heavily right now with the governor and working on the gas line, and, Glenn Farr is the big partner. Now, people say, well, you're partners. Yeah, but our job from the state side is to get everything we can. They're our partner, but that's it. Their interests are different than our interests. So in this case, same thing. You gotta have that level, and then you will have, I recommend it, you would have some professional investment banker type people, because they'll start to talk about valuations based on their own experience. They'll be advising whoever that group is. It could be the city council, it could be a group of business people, community people, city council, under some auspice of the city, to really review it and be under certain rules. Because you can do anything. In the community, you pass an ordinance, say this committee's gonna be formed, you'll have executive committee rules, you'll have privacy rules for these kinds of numbers. But we did an RFP, RFI, but the most important thing was that resolution. Because that was representing the community's interest. Then it became to the bidders. Right, that's right. And they also knew, because we made it clear publicly, we ain't just giving away our utility. Now, a lot of us were already behind the scenes saying, oh my God, we gotta sell this thing. but you never heard that. We actually kind of made our own pack on this, like, don't devalue ourselves here. But we pushed it, and we talked a lot about what we had. MacTel was one of the pieces. That was one of the pieces. We kept talking about it, do whatever we can, because we had the public forum. We could go to the media when there was real media, 3 TV stations with news and everything. We could go to them, talk about the value, and the companies knew what we were up to, but they knew there's others. But the resolution, RFI, RFP.
And Helena, thank you for being here. Bruce asked my first question about valuations, so we can scratch that. And Rhonda answered my question about, which I did ask, remember on camera, the last one, everybody laughed. But my big concern is if we are to sell to a co-op, I want upfront that process. Are we gonna RFP, RFI, whatever? Are we gonna get best value, whatever? I just want that up front. So that, going back to the last meeting when everybody laughed. Now.
Can I make a real quick comment?
Yes.
The resolution also laid out the process.
Oh, good.
Yeah, our resolution said about 18, this is the process we want. Because frankly, back then, I can say this, Tom Fink was the mayor, a lot of the assembly didn't trust him, so we won the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first deal he brought was behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And we did not like that.
And that may have happened, I don't know.
I don't know.
I wasn't here.
I'm in the future.
I was in Louisiana where there's lots of water and electricity is super cheap. But anyway, so now this brings up a confusing question because initially we were 3 options. Keep it as it is, and that's a no. Sell to the co-op, become our own co-op. So are we now adding a qualified authority to keep it as it is or no?
So let me, I would say we've always been at the 4, that's why we have
Oh,
these
okay.
3, that's why we have these 3 processes, these public meetings, that they've been structured to get us to these 3 places. You got kind of what would you look like if you were a little co-op, what would it look like if you sold, if you were gonna keep it, and you did an authority, that's why
Right.
those are that's the
Oh,
universe
okay.
of possibilities right there.
Yeah, because I think the first one, and I agree with Brian, if you keep it as is, you're gonna have problems.
Yeah, okay, so the authority is one of the choices.
It is, yes.
Okay, thanks. So then now I actually have a real question.
But I think you're about to say the same thing. You might think of something different. I don't know.
Yep.
You might come back and say, you know what about this? Because remember, at the end of the day, you have to own whatever the decision is.
As a community.
As a community, you have to own it. Because you don't get to blame someone else for the decision. That's why they've done it the way they've done it. They kept it open. I mean, you blame me, that's okay. I'm not a resident, I don't pay utilities to you.
But you're a very good Ed McMahon, because you led into my question.
Okay.
So
Get
when
that check, that big check.
When I look at what Seward has, is we have the water, we have the hydro, here is enormous, where other communities may not have that. We have wind, tide, whatever. But I'm more unfamiliar with water rights. And so how can we protect, because at the last meeting, a gentleman got up and said there was some organization planning flow meters, and it wasn't USGS. So how do we protect our natural resources that are within our community? Or can you not do that in the state of Alaska?
State owns the water rights, but.
Yeah, I would say that we are working on that. There are ways to do that. The Department of Environmental Conservation controls water rights. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission controls licensing on hydroelectric projects. And so we are moving down that path. And it's a public process when you get to a certain point on it. And there are requirements for community input. So I think that isn't, we're working what we can. We're working that to the degree we can right now. And that's irrespective of what direction the community goes.
It's
as
important
an
whether,
organization.
it's important whether we decide to sell or we decide to become our own co-op. We want to protect those natural resources, because if we really want hydro, we're gonna have to protect it. Okay, I'm glad you've got that. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you guys didn't laugh at me today.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm thinking about, because in my introduction, you heard we own hot springs resorts in Nevada, Wyoming, and Jemez. In those states, the individual owns the water rights. So how you protect them is critical. In the business I'm in, if the water goes away in a hot springs, I'm out of business. So it's it's a long, even when you own the water rights, there's a process to get the rights to those waters that you are utilizing, and then how long. And it's amazing in those states, because literally you'll get these deeds that are the old style, handwritten, all the way back from time beginning. It's wild to understand, because sometimes it was used for agriculture, some was for cattle, some it was just used for household. But in the state, if someone asked me, would water rights be an issue and protecting rights, that's probably the least of the worry I would have, because the state will go through a process with whoever owns it to make sure if you claim you can use this for hydro and you need this much, they will work with you to get that claim resolved.
But if it's another competing utility, they can just come in and build.
Well, if you already have the water rights and already figured out, they just assume those rights with state approval, I'm assuming, Yeah,
Yeah, because we have like surface rights, full rights, and then aquifer rights, depending upon which aquifer, so I don't
Right.
know this.
Just a follow-on question to that. Two or three of the most promising hydro facility projects in the area are kind of tied up right now by other utilities. Is there some way to move those forward in the interests, if the community decided, or the community's utility decided that it was in the interest of the community? Is there some way they can partner, or maybe somehow get those projects, get a hold of those projects? Because
I would say that irrespective of the status of any of those projects right now, there's always an option to sit down and talk to folks and find out where we have common ground and where we can actually make something happen. So, yes, I mean, I don't see that any of them are foreclosed. You know, all of them are different, have different, you know, whether you're on Forest Service land and need FERC permits, or whether you're on city land and the city can approve it, or whether, you know, the FERC license is owned by someone else and maybe they want to sell it, or maybe they don't, and we don't have any deal with them. You know, so there's just a lot of those, but those are all, they're things that, you know, that are out there, and we're, you know, as I've said a few times, we are putting together a strategic generation plan that will kind of outline our alternatives in that world.
And strategies how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do those projects expire at some point, or? I know there's a lot of work that's been put into some of them.
You know, what I know, I don't know about DEC water rights. I do know that, you know, FERC preliminary permits have a 5-year life. I believe FERC, full-on FERC licenses for hydroelectric projects have a 10-year life if the project isn't started. Obviously, if the project gets constructed, they have a 50-year life. I don't know if that's obvious, but they have a 50-year life and they have to be relicensed. So there are lives, and it isn't like you could lock up the world and just sit on it forever. That, you know, so that's all been.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah, we're nested. That ground has been a little traveled. So I hate to do this, but we've run over by 7 minutes, and I want to value everybody's time. I think Bruce may have one.
I got one more minute. I hope this is not too hardball, but I would like to understand where the economics of this process, where it's coming from. I don't remember the city passing a resolution that dedicated a certain amount of money towards this process, including hiring Mark's firm, etc. So could you let me know who is paying for this and how?
I can do that, yep. You might have to submit information. Just saying that's how we do it. Try to be fair to everybody. So just to wrap up, I want to thank Mark. You know, thanks a million for coming down here. A long drive, but hey, it's almost summer down here, so you gotta love that.
Someone was coming down this weekend, so he said, what's the weather like? And at one point it wasn't raining. When I got here into the parking lot, I tell you about it, it's raining, but it's good. It's spring.
You know, there are more opportunities ahead for Seward residents to ask questions in a lot of forums. We certainly will take questions in writing if you have them. We want you to learn about utility options and models. So if you have questions about them, bring them to us. Like I said, I haven't worked out the details. I have a concept, and usually when I have a concept, my buddy Taylor here gets to figure out how we're going to do the details. But I have a concept of some sort of an apples to apples comparison of these various alternatives. So that hopefully will be, we'll have it for our next town hall meeting. There will be additional surveys. Please, I got some great feedback on the survey tonight, and we'll certainly incorporate that. And please, you know, participate in the surveys. If you get asked to participate in the focus groups, please participate. The website, we have the website up, and so you'll see updates there on where we're going. And just to reiterate, I think I've said it once or twice tonight, you know, we have not made any decisions. This is an open and transparent, collaborative learning process for everybody in the community. And all you're going to get out of it is what you put into it. So get involved, because, you know, we're trying to move you to a place where you can make a decision, and I can go out in my van and go skiing and mountain biking. Things that are on my future list. Yeah, so that's it. I want to just remind folks that this is being live streamed and recorded, and so it's available if someone wants to go back and watch it, or if someone you know didn't get a chance to be here tonight, they can go back and watch it. And with that, I think we've wrapped it up. Thanks a million.
Thank you.